Few public health campaigns have been as successful as the slip, slop, slap, sun-safe message. But that success has led to an increasing number of Tasmanians having a vitamin D deficiency. That's put the Cancer Council in a predicament because there's a growing body of evidence linking a lack of vitamin D to a number of other cancers. The Council and other authorities are now trying to find a balance, working out how to recommend some sun exposure while at the same time protecting against skin cancer. As the last of the autumn leaves fall and the sun moves lower in the sky, Tasmanians naturally rug up and head indoors. For Paul Jackson, regardless of the season, most of his time is spent inside.
I work in IT, which means I'm behind a computer inside a building 90% of the day, and my interests outside of IT tend to be things like astronomy, which means I don't get very much sunlight.
He's one of an increasing number of Tasmanians being found to be vitamin D deficient.
I went to see the doctor for some medical tests, and he advised that I have blood tests, and one of the blood tests that they did was for vitamin D deficiency, and sure enough it came back fairly low.
A third of the population were vitamin D deficient even during our summer months, and then when you're talking into your winter and spring months, that jumps up as high as 2/3.
Unless you're at the extreme end of deficiency, there are often no symptoms. Researchers have long known there's a link between vitamin D and the onset of multiple sclerosis, but now there's a growing body of research linking the lack of vitamin D to an increasing number of other chronic diseases.
There is some evidence coming through to show that vitamin D deficiency may impact on breast cancer risk, colon cancer risk and prostate cancer risk. Unfortunately, we don't have any Tasmania-specific studies to show what's happening here on a local level, but there is enough evidence out there now that we need to look at and we need to start acting upon.
There are also concerns there could be links to influenza, cardiovascular disease and mental health.
There's some emerging evidence in that area as well, depression for example.
Senior researcher at the Menzies Institute, INGRID says for a long time it was thought vitamin D was only involved in bone health.
When they found that there are actually vitamin D receptors on many cells in your body, so in your immune system, in your brain cells, in your colon, that's where people started to think, hey, there must be much more to vitamin D than just the influence on bone health, and that's where the research started.
Vitamin D is not like other vitamins.
It's actually not a vitamin, it's a steroid hormone, and as a result, it binds to receptors in your cell and mediates its effect via that pathway.
Doctors are starting to take notice. General practitioner Jeff Chapman says it wasn't long ago that people in aged care facilities were the only ones being tested.
I think we assumed that most of the rest of the population, if they led a relatively active life, would have adequate levels. We don't assume that any longer, so we are certainly looking more widely.
Test results are often unexpected.
We're seeing a broad range. It's quite surprising. We're seeing surprisingly low levels in people who you would not think had low levels. We're seeing quite adequate levels in people who you think might satisfy one of those risk groups.
The full picture on vitamin D isn't yet clear, but it seems, like iron, some people are better at absorbing it than others. A number of Northern Hemisphere countries routinely give supplements and fortify their food.
That is a route that Australia could take. At the moment, margarines are a little bit fortified and some milks, but there's not a lot of mandatory fortification at this point in time, so that is something that could be reviewed.
Broad-scale supplementation is not being advocated yet.
We still have to wait for that body of evidence in a number of those areas before we can really say vitamin D supplementation as opposed, and we know, for example, that vitamin D deficiency might be related to certain of these conditions or exacerbations. What we still to find out in some is whether you actually, if you get it right, if you get the vitamin D levels right, whether that prevents. So there's still a body of evidence to come.
While waiting for more research, the best way to get vitamin D is through exposure to the sun. That's placing the Cancer Council in a tricky position.
It certainly is a double-edged sword because we need to focus on the prevention of cancer, and our most common cancer is skin cancer, so that's where our focus has been for many, many years. However, we do recognise that we do need some sun for vitamin D, so it's been a challenge of getting that balance right and educating the public to say, yes, we don't want you to get skin cancer and this is what you need to do to prevent the skin cancer, but at the same time, sun is very, very important for overall health and general well-being.
We've been really well educated, and people are doing a great job in terms of preventing skin cancer. But as we know, there is a tension between the two messages, and that's what we are trying to solve to a certain extent.
The challenge is getting enough sun without getting burnt, but how much exposure is safe?
They're exactly the questions we'd like to answer. It is very hard to give one message that will fit all, but that is one thing that we are trying to do to get a better grip on, okay, how much sun do we really need?
From mid-April to September, UV levels in Tasmania are consistently low. Despite being sunny this week, the metre barely reached above 1.
So there may be times, particularly in the middle of winter in August, where people, even though they're doing all the right things, still may not get enough vitamin D from the sun.
The Weather Bureau only forecasts UV readings for Tasmania during the daylight saving months, but that's about to change.
Later this month, or later in June, the Bureau in Tasmania will be forecasting UV levels year round, so even in winter.
A working group, including the Cancer Council, is holding talks with the Bureau about providing advice, along with the UV forecast, on safe times to get out in the sun.
Yes, indeed, I've slip-slopped and slapped, but at the end of summer apparently my vitamin D levels are borderline low, so I'll be taking the advice of the Cancer Council and others, whatever they decide to advise me.